to WhiskyCast, Cask Strength Conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 883 for July 26th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
I was the kind of guy that you knew that could get stuff. I was kind of like a mini Amazon. And, you know, if you got to talk to me, we became friends, and you'd say, hey, man, can you help me get this? I'd help you get it. Boom.
It's been almost 4 years since Gilbert Toby Curtsinger pleaded guilty to stealing barrels and bottles of whiskey from Buffalo Trace and Wild Turkey in what has come to become known as PappyGate. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but was released after serving just 30 days on shock probation. He was the only one of the 10 PappyGate defendants to serve prison time. The PappyGate story is featured in the new season of Netflix's documentary series Heist. Nick Frew directed the documentary, which also explains why Curtsinger was never actually charged with stealing the cases of Pappy Van Winkle that gave PappyGate its name. Turns out Curtsinger may have been telling the truth all along when he denied stealing those whiskeys.
If you happen to be someone who had stolen a lot of very expensive whiskey, coming in and testify or giving some evidence against Toby was a perfect opportunity to insulate yourself.
My conversation with Heist director Nick Frew is coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. Along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast, and soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Hey, Gabriel Cardarella here from Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey. I'm excited to share with you that Dewar's is the most awarded blended Scotch whiskey in the world. And that's worth raising a glass to. So grab a bottle today and enjoy this week's episode of WhiskyCast.
Let's get started with the news. It's 2 months until the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in Bardstown. Tickets for the entire festival are already sold out. As we reported earlier this year, festival organizers changed the format for the festival this year to require tickets for all tastings and events, along with general admission tickets for access to the lawn at Spalding Hall in Bardstown. More than 9,000 tickets have been sold, but Wave TV in Louisville reports there's a backlash from Bardstown residents who see the change as selling out the local community in favor of out-of-town visitors, and claim they were never told they'd need tickets to attend this year. Festival President Randy Prasa noted that announcements went out last December on both the festival's website and its Facebook page. The festival has already confirmed its dates for next year, September 18th through the 22nd of 2022. We are starting to see proof of COVID vaccinations or negative tests required in order to attend whiskey events. September's malt stock in the Netherlands will be requiring proof in line with government regulations, as will Whiskey Live in Paris. And no proof, no entry. We also have a couple of COVID-related event postponements to report. The Whiskey Festival Noord-Nederland in Groningen, the Netherlands, will not take place in late October as planned. Organizers say they have not been given any idea whether local officials will allow the event to take place or what restrictions they can expect, so they have decided to postpone it until next March. Meanwhile, the World Whiskey Forum was scheduled to bring together some of the industry's top whiskey makers at Stauning Distillery in Denmark this September, but with international travel still an issue, the forum's founders have decided to postpone the conference until next June. Friday marked 100 days until the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, and Scotch whisky industry leaders have pledged to reach net zero status by 2040. The Scotch Whisky Association's sustainability strategy has already cut greenhouse gas emissions at distilleries by a third since 2009, along with reducing water use by 22% and cutting the amount of waste going to landfills by 75%. On that front, White & Mackay unveiled the expansion of its Scottish Oak program across the entire company, with all 5 of its distilleries in Scotland to start maturing whiskies in Scottish Oak. That included planting 13,000 saplings in the woods around Fettercairn Distillery and teaming up with Speyside Cooperage to train coopers on the wood's unique characteristics. White & Mackay master whiskey maker Greg Glass has been pushing for increased use of Scottish oak in whiskey production for more than a decade. I caught up with him Friday on FaceTime during the 60th anniversary celebration at Invergordon Distillery.
It's been a long time in the making, and there's a lot of development work in the future of Scottish oak. And, a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between the Scottish oak and European and American oak? And really, we're starting with a blank page with Scottish oak, and through the analytical trials that we've done and also larger scale trials of Scottish oak, there's some really beautiful flavours that we can create. But really, it's something pretty new. Other people have used Scottish oak in the past, mainly for sort of one-off editions or trialing purposes. So what we're doing is we built a program to help to support local skills. So we have a training program within the apprenticeship at Speyside Cooperage, for example, in Craigellachie, for building casks from scratch, and also working with landowners, sawmill owners, etc., to be able to get this program to actuation.
And you actually have to start growing more Scottish oak too, don't you?
Absolutely. We have to look to the future, and to cite an example, just recently we've announced at our Fettercairn Distillery the planting of over 13,000 saplings, and this is a long-term project where we're looking to grow these saplings over time, and not just grow them, but also it's about the management of these saplings over time in different generations of foresters and different generations of whiskey makers for the possibility in the future of using Scottish oak. We'll never compete with the American bourbon industry, as it were, in terms of sourcing casks, but it's something that's a different style, a different character, especially as people like to talk more about the micro-provenance of the sourcing, so not only using local barley, local water, but also thinking about using local and responsibly sourced wood and oak in the future in Scotland.
And it also helps with carbon capture and the reforestation efforts in general with the environment, right? With climate change.
Absolutely. So it's not just a single faceted program. What we're looking at is almost a holistic approach to building a program, so about responsible sourcing, about supporting local trade, local industries, and also that responsibility that we have for the future in terms of laying down the seeds or acorns, if you like, now to improve our local environment. But not only are we replanting or planting in rural areas, we've even attached to the Scottish Oak Programme an urban replanting programme, which allows us to improve not just the local environment, but also the experience that we all have as human beings with getting in contact with nature. So that's another exciting dimension that we've not really talked about to any length so far, but is actually including urban replanting and rewilding as part of the Scottish Oak Programme moving forward.
The next step comes this fall with the release of a Scottish Oak Fettercairn single malt. Sticking with wood for a minute, Heaven Hill and Independent Stave Company have teamed up to help the forestry industry's education into American white oak. They're helping to cover the cost for loggers to attend sustainability training programs being offered by state forestry associations. Heaven Hill Environmental and Sustainability Manager Rachel Nally says the loggers are critical to ensuring the long-time supply of American white oak, since the lifespan of a barrel starts not when it's first filled with whiskey, but while the trees it comes from are still growing in the forest.
This program is really focused on ensuring that our loggers who are out in the field actually harvesting this wood for our barrels have an understanding of the best management practices that help white oak regenerate in the forest. As we cut down trees in the forest, there's a lot of different practices they can use to ensure that, and to ensure that the forest is left in a way that's going to foster the future regrowth of white oak. And so this program is really focused on just making sure that those loggers have the opportunity to get into these courses. Any day out of the forest in a training course for a logger is a day that they don't get paid. And so we want to make sure that they have both the funding available to actually go to the course, but then also, if they need to have their hotel covered, we can help with some of those things as well.
How did you implement this in Tennessee with the Forestry Association down there?
We partnered with them through Independent Stave Company. So Independent Stave is such a great partner because they are dealing with the loggers every day. And so they have the relationships already there with some of these organizations, and we're able to contact them and say, this is what we want to do. This is how we want to help these loggers enroll in your courses. And people like Tennessee were just so excited to have, companies wanting to get people into their classes.
120 loggers have already completed sustainability certification courses through the program. In other news, here's an example of why it pays to own the casino instead of gambling at one. The Scottish founders of the online whiskey auction site Whiskey Hammer have sold a 49% ownership stake in the site and its Still Spirit retail shop and whiskey bar in Aberdeenshire to Hong Kong-based Rare Whiskey Holdings. The purchase price is described only as a, quote, multi-million-pound deal, but investors who supported Daniel and Craig Milne in a crowdfunding round 2 years ago will be getting back £2.60 for every pound they invested. New whiskies announced this week. This is Belfast Whiskey Week in Northern Ireland, and Killowen Distillery is releasing its second annual exclusive bottling for the festival. It's an 11-year-old port cask finish that's a cousin to last year's rum cask finished festival exclusive. It's available through irishmalts.com for £124.95, but only to Belfast Whiskey Week ticket holders. Back in January, Irish whiskey historian Finan O'Connor told us about his research into historical Irish whiskey mash bills and recipes, along with the work he did with Boann Distillery to recreate some of those recipes. While all 144 casks created with those recipes have already been sold, Boann created 500 special packs with samples of 10 different new-make spirits. They're available as part of a tasting scheduled for this Friday night as part of Belfast Whiskey Week, and they're available through the Boann website for €135 each. Daryl McNally's new Irish whiskey venture has been unveiled. He stepped down recently as master distiller and blender at Dublin Liberties Distillery and is teaming up with Whistle Pig Whiskey on the new Limavady single-barrel Irish whiskey brand. Limavady will focus on single-cask Irish single-malt whiskies, while Whistle Pig will handle the bottling and distribution out of its facility in Vermont. The first bottles will go on sale in the U.S., Northern Ireland, and the rest of the U.K. next month. The recommended retail price in the U.S., $49.99 a bottle. And, by the way, we now have an update on Whistle Pig's #FreeBeyondBourbon social media campaign that I mentioned last week. The distillery was in a dispute with the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau over its Beyond Bourbon and Beyond Rye whiskeys, bottled at 50.05% ABV. since federal regulations for bottled-in-bond whiskeys strictly require a 50% ABV strength. The TTB had asked that WhistlePig surrender the label approval certificates for both of those whiskeys, which WhistlePig did. WhistlePig CEO Jeff Kozak told me in an email late this week that they have worked out a compromise with the regulators. This year's batches will be allowed to sell through, and the new label approval that I mentioned last week will apply to next year's Beyond Bourbon and Rye releases, which will be bottled at 50% ABV. Football Hall of Fame legend Terry Bradshaw is expanding his playbook in the whiskey business. He's about to release a new rye whiskey to go along with his Bradshaw Straight Bourbon that's being distilled at the Green River Distillery in Owensboro, Kentucky. Bradshaw was the guest of honor Thursday night at the Kentucky Derby Museum's Bourbon Legends Series dinner and raffled off 2 of the first bottles of Bradshaw Kentucky Straight Rye, along with signed footballs. The dinner raised more than $32,000 for the museum. And finally, Texas's Milam and Green Distillery has a special event of its own coming up on August 7th. It's a benefit to raise money for HOME, that stands for Housing Opportunities for Musicians and Entertainers. Of course, Austin is one of the live music centers of the U.S., and the group helps aging musicians in the Austin area with their housing expenses. There's a single cask bottling of Milam and Green bourbon going on sale that day only at the distillery for $150 a bottle. All proceeds from the 189 bottles will be donated to HOME. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. Don't forget to join us for the Happy Hour Live webcast each Friday, starting at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. London time. If you missed our discussion the other night with Todd Leopold of Leopold Brothers Distillery in Denver and Bob Baxter of Two Brewers Whiskey in Whitehorse, Yukon, the on-demand replay is available right now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. We'll have a podcast version out later this week. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Belfast Whiskey Week events continue all week long with both online and in-person events. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Nico whiskey tasting this Wednesday night. Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville, Kentucky has a Maker's Mark tasting with Jane Bowie that same night. Art Begg's Monsters of Smoke bus tour has stops in Nashville and Knoxville, Tennessee this week. The Black Bourbon Society's Open Door Tour wraps up with events in Dallas the weekend of August 6th through the 8th. Bonham's has its next auction of rare whiskeys on August 20th in Hong Kong. And as of now, Whiskey Live Perth is still on the schedule for August 20th and 21st. Right now, we have 146 live and virtual events on our searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. The calendar is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the Where to Buy page at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please drink responsibly.
After 175 years, Dewar's has learned it's not all about awards. Staying Curious happened to help us fill that trophy case with more than just our amateur fishing, golf, and bowling trophies. It takes time and commitment to make some of the world's most awarded whiskey, which is why every Dewar's whiskey goes through a secondary resting period for a more balanced blend with extra smoothness. From our first master blender, A.J. Cameron, to our current Stephanie McLeod, we've honed our double aging process to make some of the world's best Scotch whiskeys. Dewar's 12-year, for example, was just awarded the double gold at this year's World Spirits Competition in San Francisco. And Dewar's 27-year took home Best Blended Scotch Whiskey 16 years or older. No need to take our word for it. Pick up one of these great whiskeys today. Your palate won't be disappointed.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. The PappyGate saga shocked the whiskey world 8 years ago when an estimated 195 bottles of Pappy Van Winkle whiskies were stolen from Buffalo Trace Distillery in 2013. At the time, we covered the theft extensively here on WhiskyCast. It took sheriff's deputies 2 years to make the first arrests connected to the case when Buffalo Trace employee Gilbert Toby Curtsinger was arrested after a tipster told deputies they could find barrels of stolen whiskey at his house. Note, they found barrels of wild turkey, not bottles of Pappy, and that will become important later. Now the PappyGate saga is being told in the new season of the Netflix documentary series Heist. Here's a brief clip, as Curtsinger himself tells the story of how he started selling whiskey in the first place. It may well be the first time he's ever told his side of the story.
One friend of mine, he came over and ate, and we had some Van Winkle. Well, the next thing I know, he really liked it. And he's like, how much of that you got? And I said, why? He said, well, I know somebody wants some. I said, but it's for myself. I said, because I like it. And he said, they want to buy it. I said, man, I ain't getting into that right there. I said, here's 2 bottles. Take it and get out of here. So then the next day he come back and he dropped the wad of cash down. I mean, just $100 bills, bam, in the banknotes. I was like, golly, it was more than I'd probably made in a month. And then he's like, well, man, anything else? He said, they'll take everything you got. So I called my buddy. He said, look what this is going for online. And I was looking and I was like, good Lord, that's selling for $1,000 a bottle for a 20-year-old. That is ridiculous. Like back in the day, $50 a bottle. What happened here?
Curtsinger got over that initial hesitation. He and his friends figured out how to get not just a few bottles, but whole barrels of whiskey out of Buffalo Trace and Wild Turkey until they got caught. Curtsinger, his wife Julie, and 8 other people were indicted in connection with the thefts and selling that stolen whiskey around central Kentucky along with steroids. However, Curtsinger was the only one sentenced to prison time. He pleaded guilty and was freed on shock probation after serving just 30 days of a 15-year sentence. To this day, he has always maintained that he had nothing to do with the actual Pappy Van Winkle thefts. Nick Frew directed the 2 episodes of Heist that focus on PappyGate. He joined me on a Zoom call this week from London. What prompted you to look at PappyGate in the first place? In the grand scheme of great heists of the last 15, 20 years, where does this fall into the spectrum?
Well, when approaching the show, it was always our goal to come up with a varied and rich and eclectic set of stories. We're always looking for stuff that was maybe slightly outside the norm. That we've had our eyes on stories about wine and about rare feathers, and we're really hoping to do one on a European art thief. If the series is only cash being stolen, then we're missing a whole other rich world of crime, and also trying to find stories that had in their specificity there's a sort of a broader appeal. You get to tap into different people who have certain interests, and I think that there's such a rich and interesting tale that uncovers a sort of a part of the world and a certain society and a certain sort of mindset that's very different from some of the other stories. And all the stories in this series were different, and deliberately so. And we always knew this was going to be a slightly tough one to tell. Maybe slightly breaks the mold. But that was part of the fun challenge. And I think that we were just drawn to the richness of the world. I, as you can tell, I'm from England. So, to me, Kentucky's an exotic and enticing place with its own sort of mysteries and cultures that it was really fun to get our heads into and then to hopefully portray in an intriguing and entertaining light.
We both come into that Kentucky culture as outsiders. Though I grew up in Indiana, I live on the East Coast now and am not part of that Kentucky culture. How hard was it for you and your crew to get in there and convince people to tell you the stories, especially the Curtsinger family? They've not talked to anybody until they talked to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we have a great team that we work with. We have some great producers. One key member of our team, Maria, who is Russian and has drunk her way around the world and just knows how to talk to people and is honest, no nonsense, has just the most trustworthy and charming face you've ever seen. And she did a great job of building up relationships and building trust. And I think that there's a desire in all of us as filmmakers, the showrunner Derek and Martin Desmond Rowe and I, the three sort of key creatives behind the stories, always to try and find not just what's juicy about the story, but really what's motivating these people that made these decisions. And I think that if you watch all of the stories, there's an emphasis on getting inside the heads of these people, because we sold the show to Netflix and with the hook of like, this is something that everybody has thought of. Everybody's sort of weighed up in their mind. Am I the sort of person that could do this? What would be the thing where I could take that extra step, cross that line? And I think the understanding that these people who have all basically made terrible mistakes, made a very questionable set of decisions, all got there from a place of, they all had their own journey towards that any of us could have found ourselves on. And I think that when people understand that you're coming in going, I really want to just hear what it is that drove you to do this. And when they realize that you are listening, I think they find it quite comforting. And they're like, oh, this is actually a chance to have my voice heard, maybe set my record straight, find a bit of catharsis. You're dealing with people who are describing the most traumatic incidents of their lives in large part. And you've got to be really delicate with that. And it was a lot harder, I think, than the last show we did was about quirky competitions. And it's like people going, oh, my God, you want to ask me about frog jumping? Oh, my God, I'll tell you anything you want to know. This required more delicacy. But I think that we have, there's an authenticity to what we're trying to do as filmmakers that I think helped convince people that we were the right stewards for their story.
You talk about authenticity, and it is obvious to anyone who's been around the distilleries in Kentucky that that wasn't Buffalo Trace where you shot it. And having dealt with Buffalo Trace over the years covering PappyGate, every time I have ever asked a single question, including asking them about this documentary, the comment has been, no comment, we're not talking about it. How hard was it for you to get into the Buffalo Trace side of things and do the recreations elsewhere to make this happen? Because obviously you shot at a distillery. It's hard to fake that with the stills and stuff in the background. But I know that wasn't the Buffalo Trace gift shop that the guys were coming out of. How'd you pull this off?
So we had one location was a distillery in Los Angeles. We shot everything in Los Angeles. There is interviews and B-roll and a little bit of verite with families and stuff that we would do on location. And you can see where that appears in the show. But the distillery was a combination of an actual working distillery, and there's basically a standing location in LA, which is a big set of warehouses, which with an ingenious set of art department and cinematography decisions, you can play for a lot of the locations that you need, and then that's all sewn together with the actual establishers. But yeah, there was no chance that we were going to get any help from them. And to be honest, from a practical point of view, it's easier for us to stay in the city that the production company is based in. So that it's fine. And there are some moments where you're looking for a level of authenticity you can't get, but in the end, we'll do our best and we'll hope that that it plays well for most of the audience. I've never been there, so I don't know if it felt right, but hopefully it played well enough for the audience.
It passed.
Thank you.
It passed, although my compliments to your drone pilot for getting the aerial videos of Buffalo Trace, because knowing the place, I suspect it was probably on a weekend morning when nobody was around, and it was one of these easier to ask forgiveness than permission type of things.
We're also able to license stuff. I think when you're trying to not upset people, it's best not to fly illegal drones over their buildings. So thankfully, there are other people that have shot things that we're able to license from time to time, which is very helpful.
On that note, one of the comments that I've seen on social media over the last few days is, are these guys going to get sued for using the actual labels, the boxes, the shirts that the crew are wearing that have the Buffalo Trace logo on them that look pretty real? I assume your lawyers vetted all that stuff ahead of time. I
mean, I'm with you. I got to assume that too. That we go through quite a rigorous process, which I'm not party to. I don't know the ins and outs of the legalities of it all, but I do know that everyone thinks that we're safe. I think there's probably a fair use statute that I probably don't understand that makes it okay for us to do these things. But thankfully, there are smarter people that are different pay grades to me that can make those decisions.
Because those of us who cover the whiskey industry know that Buffalo Trace and his parent company, Sazerac, have a very good team of IP lawyers that are known to be active when anybody in the industry gets too close to one of their trademarks. So I think that was the concern among a lot of folks.
Okay, well, I'll watch my back.
Did you get to sit down face-to-face with Toby Curtsinger?
So actually, it was our showrunner, Derek, that conducted the initial interviews. I did pick up interviews. They were conducted like this over Zoom. There's always stuff once you do that first interview that you're like, I think we need to go back and dig into this, and we need to clarify some stuff. Because he sat down twice with Derek, and it's such a big labyrinthine story that you come away sort of blinded by facts and then realize you need more. But so I wasn't in that room, but I'm very familiar with the interview itself, having sort of worked with it so closely.
Do you believe him when he says he had nothing to do with the actual Pappy Van Winkle bottles that were stolen from the warehouse?
I mean, I have such a sense from the way that he answered questions that he would sometimes try to justify his decisions, but he was always so... He really wanted to let everyone know that he wanted to take responsibility for his actions. There was a lot of contrition. There was a lot of remorse. And I never got the sense, outside of wanting to make people understand, that he was trying to pull the wool over our eyes and that there was stuff that he could have been admitting to. I do feel like that these interviews become an opportunity for catharsis, for getting stuff off your chest. And I'd be really surprised if, now that the case was settled and he'd moved on with his life, that there were aspects of that he'd want to continue to tell untruths about. I just don't understand the motivation for that when there's so much truth and so much outpouring of trying to clear things up and make and pay for the mistakes that you've made. I don't know. So and also as a filmmaker, it's like it's I want to believe him. I want to believe that the story we're telling makes sense and is right. I mean, one thing we made a big point when he says in the first episode, he said, I had nothing to do with that. And then we just hold the camera on him and let him watch him sort of squirm. And definitely as filmmakers in that moment, I don't want the audience to believe him. I want the audience to be, a little conflicted. But I hope that by the end of the thing, they've decided that they can. And I think that the the revelation about other bottles being stolen and immunity given to other people may sort of bolster that claim. So yeah, I'm on team I believe Toby.
How do you balance that desire for catharsis and letting them share their story with the argument that some have made that documentaries like this glorify people who committed crimes, frankly?
I mean, I 100% hear that argument. I do believe that, anyone that's actually watched the series and you watch all of the episodes, they're all arcs, and it's all people who have a motivation to do something, and they get caught up in this sort of whirlwind experience, and then they come crashing down. I don't think there's not going to be a heist story about somebody who's gotten away with it. Like, everyone, even if they do, like, we have one story which is about somebody who does kind of get away with it, but realizes that her life she's going to be living on the run for the rest of her life, and she's going to always be looking over her shoulder, and she turns herself in. She has to control that moment, but she eventually accepts that she's miserable. And like, all of these stories are, to a certain degree, cautionary tales, and they're quite true. And there are very few successful bank robbers out there, and any of them that do exist are certainly not going to do an interview with us about the bank job that they pulled off. So sort of built into the nature of the show is there is always a downfall at the end of the roller coaster ride. Which is also, it's a challenge for us filmmakers. Like, you don't want to end on a low. You want to try and make that journey feel still satisfying and rewarding, and put a little upswing in the end and keep the energy going. We're not trying to chastise people. We want to celebrate the fun of it, but also the consequences are right there on screen. So I feel it's balanced enough that I don't feel like I'm creating bank robbers right now, which is a nice feeling, because that's definitely not our goal.
And to be fair, whiskey has been stolen out of warehouses, not just in Kentucky, but in Scotland, and pretty much everywhere whiskey has been distilled for hundreds of years, pretty much since it went into barrels. We have legends about warehousemen in Scotland doing the same thing with copper dogs and sneaking barrels out, or sneaking sips out of barrels and stuff like that. So it wouldn't be the first time. But there's a feeling that because even though Curtsinger was the only one of the ring that actually was sentenced to prison time, he only did 30 days and got shock probation. And I know there was still a feeling that because of that, he really did sort of get away with it in some ways.
Oh, I definitely see that. I mean, I never heard of shock probation before, and I was like, wow, that's, I think what we'd call that in England, a cushy deal. But it's not. I can't cast judgment on the Kentucky legal system. I do know that, like, the man whose life fell apart, and he spent 2 years fighting this thing, and lost a lot of money and a lot of friends and a lot of respect, and I think he's been on an enormous journey. So I don't think he is living a life now where he feels like he beat the system and he's living high on the spoils. I think that he's been cut down to size quite a lot, and probably learnt an enormous amount along the way. Not that I'm saying that one sort of justice has more validity than another, or I'm trying to sort of equivocate and negotiate, but I don't think he's sitting there laughing, going, "Ha ha ha! I got the better of them all." I think the whole experience was it blew up in his face, and I think it was a nightmare for a while. And I think it's been hard for him to get back on his feet and look himself in the eye and be a proud human. And I think that's an enormous challenge for anyone.
You got farther inside his family than anybody that's told this story so far with your crew, including old Christmas videos of Christmas morning with his kids and things like that. I have to ask this question, and it's a tough one, and it's a sensitive one. Were the Curtsingers compensated for taking part in this?
Oh, no, we don't ever pay people. That's like, it's just, you get into really murky waters with that, and it's just not our policy. Like, we're making documentaries, and that's what I find interesting, and that's why I understand the motivations run deeper than that sort of thing. We have so many people that try and They're like, oh, great. Oh, you want to tell my story? Great. Speak to this guy who owns my life rights. You can have it for $100,000. And I'm like, oh my God, you have no idea how this works. Like our documentary budgets are enough, but and also our documentarian principles are enough. And usually, not everybody says yes to being a subject in one of these things, and certainly not everyone says yes to taking part in these things. But it's amazing how many people, when they understand, hey, we're trying to tell a story, still want to do it because they want to be heard and not because they're looking to cash in. So, no, the whole family were forthcoming because I think, they decided, okay, once you're in, and then getting all those old family, old and new home videos are really, really useful in building the story. And in that, there's a lovely intimacy that you can create in that. We're like, oh, okay, this is a real sort of window into the dynamics. But yeah, it's never a money thing.
I have to ask also, because I know that some documentarians have done this, did you license for a fee those videos? Because I know that's been a loophole that others have used in the past to say, well, we didn't pay them for interviews, but we did license their videos.
Everything that's on screen has to be licensed. There has to be, if it can be sourced, it needs to be documented. I am not privy to whether or not there was a compensation fee for that. I doubt it. I think that once we get in, I think that's I don't know, but I very much doubt it.
You mentioned that Toby Curtsinger's not laughing and saying that he got away with something. But in the second part of this story, it appears that you found evidence that there might very well be someone who is laughing and saying they got away with it, and you alluded to that a couple of minutes ago with the magic word immunity.
Yes.
Without giving the gentleman's name, since he's never been charged, can you tell us that part of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sheriff's department had zoned in on Toby, and in order to make their case, they offered anyone and everyone in his circle immunity for information. And if you happen to be someone who had stolen a lot of very expensive whiskey, coming in and testify or giving some evidence against Toby was a perfect opportunity to insulate yourself against that crime. At one point, I really wished that the story was that juicy that said same person was the one that dropped a dime on Toby, because I do think that would be a very genius crime of the century to create a straw man to take the rap and then get immunity in testifying against him. But I don't think that's true. And in our show, we do not name anyone that anyone may think is the person that dropped a dime, even though some people definitely have theories. But we didn't get into that because it just didn't feel necessary to pick at that wound.
But there is a person who testified, or at least told the deputies, and got immunity that they took 17 cases of Pappy out of the warehouse.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely exists. And, that so I suppose in a way, that he if anyone is somebody that was able to walk away with maybe a smile on his face, because that was a great trick that was pulled there. I actually benefited from greatly.
And while you name the person in the documentary, we are not going to. They have never been charged. Do you think this was a mistake by the sheriff's department to start offering get-out-of-jail-free cards right and left?
I think that the way that it played out, you can frame it as a mistake, because they took a swing at one guy and missed another guy who maybe was closer to the person that they were looking for. But because it played out that way. But I think that, and I think, as the cops said in the documentary, they were like, it's one of the dangers of playing that game. There are only so many tools in their arsenal to try and get to the bottom of something. And I do think, that sometimes people get blinded to the peripherals because they're zoned in on one answer. But how do you know that that guy's going to come in and he's going to happen to be Mr. 17 cases. And you're like, well. And they said, the cops were like, oh my God, that felt like a gut punch, because they must have known, and they must have, and I know that Pat Melton, the sheriff, he puts on a brave face and he's like, look, he stole a lot of whiskey, and we solved the case. But I know that they must have mixed feelings about how successful the outcome really was.
And you mentioned Pat Melton, the sheriff, who has been on WhiskyCast, was on our show during the investigation. He wound up not being reelected a few years later and lost his job as sheriff. How much do you think PappyGate played a role in that?
I mean,
he made a lot of people mad in Franklin County.
I mean, that's true. And I think, as we can sort of see in the show, he's already sort of treading on toes and ruffling feathers. And I think not having the city police on team and really going after those guys. Also, there was more in that investigation as well. There was sort of more sort of juice that we could have squeezed out of the relationship and that investigation. And Pat even did an internal investigation into his department to make sure that they were clean. It was a big thing. But I think there were some noses bent out of shape. And in the end, I don't know how. I mean, I don't have the full context because I'm not from down there, but you've got to imagine that played a part. And certainly in the way that it's presented in the documentary, we draw that line. I don't know all of the context, but also it's like you could see it. There were a lot of people that didn't like him. And in the end, I think that if you wanted Toby to go down, he only went down for 30 days. If you thought if you didn't want Toby to, it doesn't feel like he really wrapped it up in a way that everybody would be, enough people would be satisfied, and upset a lot of people along the way. So I'm sure that probably did have something to do with it.
No one really comes out looking good here, do they?
I mean, that's the thing. It is a comedy of errors, as a lot of these things are. We have another episode about an airplane heist in Miami, and that's another comedy of errors. It's all people that think they can, beat the system, and everyone thinks they're smarter than they are, and it's a lot of these episodes are sort of cautionary tales of hubris.
I have to ask about including the guy we see in the documentary as Moonshiner Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Basically a good old boy, a moonshiner, but not part of the official bourbon industry. And there have been some folks who have commented on social media that including him in there sort of perpetuates that stereotype that a lot of folks have about Kentucky is full of backwoods folks with beards running around barefoot making moonshine and stuff. What did he bring to the story that made it worth putting him in? I'm just curious because he wasn't involved in any of the PappyGate stuff.
No, he wasn't involved. I mean, we interviewed various locals and we look for colourful people who are good talkers. I mean, there are many ways to tell a story, and sometimes you're looking for flavour, commentary, opinion. And it was rare in a lot of these episodes to have someone that was maybe that far removed. But we really liked him. And we had a very, very brief interview with a local restaurateur called Rick at the end. And I put a shot in from him because I loved him. And I was like, I wish we had more of him. I'm like, in a way, I wish that we'd had more from the community in general. Like, there's only so many shooting days we can get. And the sort of chorus of local voices and differences of opinion is something that in an ideal world, if we'd had more time, I'd have liked to have a bit more,
You really could have told this in more than 2 episodes. You could have done this in an entire season of Heist if you'd wanted to.
Sure. I mean, there are, like I mentioned before, there's so many things that you have to leave out of the story just to make it make sense in the time that you've got. There's plenty on the editing floor of it's working out how much you can leave out to still have the shape so that it stays engaging. But yeah, there's definitely an expanded version of this where all of the sort of nuances of whiskey production and the law enforcement, it was labyrinthine. And Toby's operation, I mean, at one point we were like, do we need a diagram for this? Do we need to do an animation to show all the different strands? And instead we sort of went for a more sort of experiential montage approach that sort of gave you the broad strokes. Because at one point we broke everything down and it just was, I was like, how is anyone going to follow this? We're going to need to get an animator in. And then we were like, hang on, We don't need all the details. Let's give people what they need to know to understand the operation's getting bigger and bigger, and he's putting everyone in, and that's, then let's move on. So yeah, there's plenty more to explain should we have wanted to.
Did anybody offer you any of that purloined Pappy while your crew was out there?
No, I've never tried it. I believe one of our producers, Martin's, tried it. We actually have a friend in Los Angeles who says she's got the leftovers, like the last couple of sips in a bottle. And if I come over and see her, she's as a wedding present, she's going to let us share that last sip. So that's something to look forward to when I get back to America. I don't think it was a stolen bottle of Pappy. I don't know, but I trust her.
The only way I could have seen the ending any better would have been if you had been able to get the video of the prosecutor's office and the sheriff destroying all of the bottles that were seized as evidence and destroying all that whiskey and burning it.
Well, I mean, is that what they did?
Yeah, they had to destroy it all because technically there was no way to guarantee its safety. And I know that Buffalo Trace and Wild Turkey both insisted on the destruction of that evidence. They didn't want any of it getting out as a liberated PappyGate bottle into the secondary market. So I know they did destroy all the evidence.
That would have been really good. Or we could have done a recreation of it. I like your idea, and it's a little late to get it into the edit, but we may not have the budget for it. But I really like it. It's a great image.
Heist can be seen now on Netflix, and thanks to director Nick Frew for joining us. As for Toby Curtsinger today, he remains on parole and works as a house painter. He and his wife Julie hosted a viewing party in Frankfurt for the 2 episodes of Heist when they were released on Netflix, and he told the State Journal newspaper that he has no bitterness today. As I mentioned during my conversation with Nick Frew, Buffalo Trace declined to comment on the documentary or the allegation that another employee confessed to stealing the Pappy Van Winkle whiskies. And as for that decision to grant immunity from prosecution, former Franklin County Sheriff Pat Melton told the State Journal that decision was not made by his deputies, but by the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard. Oban Single Malt Scotch Whiskey is offering the chance to immerse yourself in Oban and the whiskey-making process through the Oban Abode experience. 2 winners will receive a trip to Scotland to stay in the Oban Abode, located just steps from the distillery. To learn more and enter, visit obanabode.obanwhiskey.com. Complete rules are available at the website. The Wadham Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. It's well known that I have a soft spot for dogs, and some new dog-themed whiskeys have come out recently. Let's start off with Hoover's Revenge Single Barrel Bourbon from Marble Distilling in Colorado. It's named for Hoover, a one-eyed hunting dog who wound up that way after a run-in with a mountain lion. There's a picture of Hoover on the bottle with the line, "I should have stuck to squirrels." It's bottled at 47% ABV. The nose has notes of caramel, vanilla, oak, tobacco, and leather. The taste has spicy touches of black pepper and cinnamon, along with honey, caramel, vanilla, and a hint of linseed oil. The finish is long with subtle spices and a touch of oak. I'm scoring the Hoover's Revenge Single Barrel Bourbon from Marble Distilling a 91. We also have a Border Collie in the family, in addition to our Sheepadoodle, Bader, and Bear, the Heinz 57 mutt of many different breeds. Our daughter Brianna's dog Poppy is the Border Collie, and she looks a lot like Lucy Pickles, the Border Collie featured on Swilled Dog Spirits whiskey labels. The West Virginia-based cider maker sources its whiskeys, including the barrel strength edition of Swilled Dog Straight Bourbon. It's bottled at 58.5% ABV. The nose is sweet with notes of caramel, cocoa powder, oak, brown sugar, and vanilla. The taste is spicy. Cinnamon, black pepper, and allspice notes are balanced by hints of honey, red apples, and brown sugar in the background. Adding water opens up fruity touches of peaches and apricots, along with a touch of baking chocolate. The spices fade away gently on the finish, and I'm scoring the Swilled Dog Barrel Strength Bourbon a 91. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye whiskey at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery. Their tequila cask-finished rye just received a gold medal in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. It's rye whiskey aged in extra añejo tequila barrels, displaying notes of agave and vanilla, dried fig and honey, ideal for palomas and margaritas. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. They're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. If you buy bottles from your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each one. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. We are starting to see a handful of independent bottlings from the newest Chivas Brothers distillery. Dalmanach opened in late 2014 on the site of the old Imperial Distillery in Speyside to provide whiskey for blending purposes, and there has only been one small distillery release to this date. Dramore Group has released a 5-year-old single cask of Dalmanach from a First Fill ex-bourbon barrel. It's bottled at 57% ABV. The nose is intense and aromatic with toasted marshmallows, coconut, butterscotch, lemon zest, and subtle hints of mango and oak. The taste has notes of caramel candy, butterscotch, toasted coconut, citrus fruits, a hint of spices, and just a touch of oak. The finish, long and dry with subtle spices and hints of sweetness. I'm scoring Dramore's Dalmanach 5-year-old single cask a 92. And let's wrap up with another single cask scotch. This one, a Balblair 2005 bottled exclusively for the Whiskey Exchange. Cask 213 was bottled at 48.5% ABV. The nose is malty with touches of green apples, honey, dried grass, lemon zest, and a hint of coconut. The taste is tart and spicy with a touch of lemon pepper, along with allspice, honey, coconut, and barley sugar. The finish is long and tart with just a hint of spice. I'm scoring the Whiskey Exchange's exclusive Balblair 2005 single cask a 92. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,200 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. I mentioned on social media the other day that I was interviewing Nick Frew about the Heist documentary, and we've already had some comments from people who have seen it. Alan Chenell tweeted this from Illinois. I felt the episodes glorified the perpetrator. It seemed odd that the steroid distribution, which would not have been as a result of him being around them every day, was ignored. I wonder if they got approval to use Buffalo Trace merch in the show. Thanks, Alan. As Nick said in the interview, there was a lot they had to leave out for time constraints, since they only had 2 40-minute-long episodes to tell the story. David Jennings at RareBird101 on Twitter joined us last August to talk about his new book on wild turkey, and he shared these comments. I finished the PappyGate Heist episodes last night. I went to bed with mixed feelings, still have them this morning. While a quality production with an interesting story, it seemed heavily glamorized, almost like a Buffalo Trace promotional video at times. The brand and product placement was over the top, while the focus on the weight of the criminal activity was largely downplayed. There was very little attention given to the systems that failed at both Buffalo Trace and Wild Turkey. Again, very glamorized. Curiously, outside of some prop barrels, Wild Turkey was left out of the product placement. I did catch what appeared to be half of a Wild Turkey logo in Curtsinger's shed. I wonder if both brands were approached and presented options for brand promotion. Thanks, David. Wild Turkey apparently did cooperate with the production in a small way, since the distillery was acknowledged in the credits. But Buffalo Trace, as I've noted before, did not cooperate at all, and it's amazing what Hollywood prop departments can come up with. Lyle Richardson at Spectre's Hockey on Twitter added this from Prince Edward Island in Canada. We watched part 1 last night. I'm fascinated by how these guys thought they could get away with it. It's also an interesting backstory on the rise of bourbon's popularity and the whiskey culture in Kentucky. Finally, our pal Kat Augustin in Los Angeles tweeted this while listening to last week's webcast episode. Listening to the new WhiskyCast, and Mark is drinking my Dream Dram. Berry Brothers and Rudd, first independent bottlers. 1982, my birth year. The Glenlivet, my first whiskey job. So cool. Sorry I only had a small sample available. Now I feel guilty for not having enough to share. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. There was a party Friday at White & Mackay's Invergordon Distillery to celebrate Invergordon's 60th anniversary. Back then, most of the grain whiskey distilled in Scotland for blending use came from either Glasgow or Edinburgh, but Chartered Accountant Frank Thompson and Inverness Provost James Grigger saw a need for jobs in the Invergordon area following the closing of the Royal Navy's base there back in 1956. They founded Invergordon Distillers and started construction on the distillery in 1959. And as White & Mackay's Richard Patterson told me on that FaceTime call from the party Friday, it became the first grain whiskey distillery in the Highlands when it opened 2 years later.
But it would be until, as I said, Friday, 21st of July, 1961, when he would then distill for the first time only 10,000 gallons a week, which was around about 25,000 litres of alcohol. And in the first year, we produced 1.3 million on 2 stills. That then increased 1963 to 3 stills. And then 1978, we put 4 stills. But really, when Frank Thompson retired, stepped down as chairman in 1966, August 66, it was the new management structure in 1967 that really transformed the distillery. But more importantly, it put the Invergordon grain into many of the blends. And that went blends from all the major companies that you're talking about, Diageo, of course, we're talking about Distillers Company Limited, Seagram's, etc., and they were put into these blends, but you never heard about the name grain or Invergordon. They were always in the background. Many people still think to this day grain does not give the body or the character to the blends, which is totally untrue. What it does do, it charms and seduces the malt and creates that perfect harmony. So Frank Thompson and all his associates, 100 people were employed. So it was a big community, and it really helped the Invergordon community along with the pipe band. And that's why the pipe band are here today, because he started a pipe band. He wanted to make it the very best. They marched through Invergordon on the 9th of May 1963 and 1964. That's it, 1964, and he wanted to make it the best. And by 1967, the Invergordon Pipe Band were the third world champions of pipe. But more importantly, it brought the people together, and that's what we're doing here at Invergordon today.
While Invergordon has always been known as a grain whiskey distillery, it also has a malt whiskey heritage. It was also home to the Ben Wyvis distillery from 1965 until 1977. That distillery produced unpeated single malt for blending use. White & Mackay later acquired Invergordon in 1993, along with the Tamnavulin, Jura, Bruichladdich, Tullibardine, Deanston, and Glenallachie distilleries. Tamnavulin and Jura, of course, are the only assets from that deal the company still owns today. The Dalmore and Fettercairn distilleries were parts of earlier mergers and deals involving White & Mackay. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes, going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
All right, let's talk about our whiskey collections. Dewar's 15-year-old whiskey is a great addition, especially for those of you who like bourbon. Recently honored with a gold medal at the 2021 San Francisco World Spirits Competition, this 15-year-old has the hardware to go toe-to-toe with any bourbon. Find Dewar's 15-year-old online or in a store near you.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, people always ask me, does Redbreast go better with ice or without? Would it go well with figs, dark chocolate, apple crumble? Is there one particular thing I should enjoy it with? I tell them, yeah, other people.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.